Magnetize your minis, flight stands, custom kits, and all the hobby supplies you'll need from themagnetbaron.com.
Hello and welcome to the YouTube channel for Craft World, Aeldari.com. I'm Brent, and in this video, I'm going to be talking about what the June 2025 balance data slate means for Aeldari, and spoiler alert, the news is not great. If you're a Ynnari player, it is apocalyptic, and if you're not a Ynnari player, it's just frustrating. I will talk about ways to work around these changes, but I would be lying if I said that this one was not a bit of a bummer. Now, for you newbie autarchs out there, the balanced data slates come with updates to the rules and updates to point values. They come out a few times a year with an interest towards maintaining game balance. Typically what happens, or what's supposed to happen, is that overperforming factions will receive some sorts of nerfs and underperforming factions will receive some bonuses. And when they get this really right, it's more nuanced than that. So units, even in factions that are doing well, units that aren't seeing much play may get some points decreases, whereas even in some, say, mid-lane factions, maybe a particularly overpowered ability will be reined in or something. But GW does have, I think we can probably all agree, a long history of sometimes overcorrecting factions that are doing especially well, with something called a double nerf, where they both take away all of the rules that made the thing effective and they increase the point values for all of those things, which it seems like it should be one or the other, not both. And I'm sure they have some kind of algorithm for this. This has been a problem with the balanced data slates for as long as I've been playing. Well, I guess for as long as there have been balanced data slates. And in order to not be too surly about this one, I have to remind myself that when the index came out at the beginning of 10th edition, for most of a year, Aeldari were just absolutely out of control, and it took 2 rounds of nerfs to make them reasonable. And I'm not saying that justifies the current data slate, because it doesn't. Aeldari really have not been out of control since the Codex dropped. The Codex really did amount to a nerf for the whole faction, but I didn't mind because I didn't think it was too heavy-handed, and it made them more complex and interesting to play. But things are going to be a little bit tricky for competitive elf players in the next few months, and let's dive into why. So the first thing that we need to acknowledge is that all of these nerfs are aimed at Ynnari. If you look at the data for performance for Aeldari lists at grand tournaments, it shows Aeldari doing all right. They have a better than 50% win rate. They're certainly not dominating the meta by any stretch of the imagination, but in every round of grand tournaments, there are a few Aeldari lists here and there in the top 8. 1 or 2 will get to a podium somewhere each week, and it's not unusual for them to win. But pretty much all of the Aeldari lists getting to podiums and winning, pretty much all is an exaggeration, but 80% of them are Ynnari lists. The win rate for Ynnari has been better than 55%, but the win rate for every single other Aeldari detachment has been less than 50%, with some of them basically not being played, or depending on what data you look at, maybe even down around 40% for the faction overall if you just take Ynnari out. So if you're not playing the Death Elf cult, it's hard to be an elf player right now. It's challenging in competitive play. And the issue is that GW did not only rein in the rules for lethal intent, the Ynnari ability, and probably over-reined those in, to be fair, but they also slapped points increases on all of the most competitive units in Ynnari lists. But of course, a bunch of those are units that other detachments are relying on also. So my most competitive Seer Council list just went up 80 points. And it was already really, really hard to make it highly effective in a competitive game. And this is the problem with group punishments. Remember when you were a kid and some adult was like, one of you children did the thing and now you all must suffer. I still remember when I was in 5th grade, which for you non-Americans is ages 10 and 11. We did this States of America project, and some ill-bred ne'er-do-well who still still remains anonymous, squeezed the individually wrapped piece of American cheese that was part of the project on Wisconsin. And as a result of that disfigured, plastic wrapped government cheese lactose nightmare mutilation, none of us could go out for recess until someone confessed. We were just inside for a month, except for Cheese Girl, who was, of course, allowed to go out until I think the principal made our teacher cut it out. This stuff never works. And so all of we non-Ynnari players are now victims of the Ynnari cheese squeezing. So here's what actually changed. We'll do the rules first. So Ynnari have this lethal intent rule, which lets them make normal moves with a unit when one of their units is destroyed. And this has been reined in 3 ways. First of all, instead of a full normal move, now it's just D6 plus 1, which is massive, especially for units that were quick, like bikes. Also, the unit that makes the move now has to be within 6 inches of the destroyed unit to activate, which borders on it in and of itself as just being a total deal breaker for this. It just shuts down all kinds of tactical options. And it's now restricted to infantry and mounted units only. I think this just kind of shuts down Ynnari. I think either the D6 plus 1 or the being within 6 inches of the unit probably would have been enough to really hamper Ynnari, and then giving them both cripples them, and then the infantry and mounted thing is just like sugar on top, just in case you were going to get freaky with a transport. It's just even that on its own is probably too much. In addition, Yvrane's Herald of Inead ability now only rerolls wounds on a 1, which makes Yvrane way less good. As I said, those changes in and of themselves are, I think, already enough to kick the Ynnari win rate down into the low 40s like the other struggling detachments. But in addition, we've gotten the various points changes. Foot autarchs are up 10 points, which is just terrible news because they were essential. A lot of people were running them 3 up. They run especially well with Banshees. And Banshees are up 5 points for 5 and 10 points for 10. So if you're Brent and you're running a bunch of Banshee units and you really like to have foot autarchs with them, your 5-elf Banshee units with a foot autarch have all gone up 15 points. This was not a unit that needed a points increase. It was highly competitive. It was good, but it was fairly pointed by any reasonable measure. It's just that in Ynnari lists where those Banshees could make a free 8-inch move on your opponent's turn because of lethal intent and then advance and charge with battle focus on your own turn, their mobility was insane. And there are other Ynnari melee tricks. And so we had to stop those Death Elf Banshees that had already had lethal intent taken away with this massive points increase. Fire Dragons are up 10 points for 5, but there's no change to the squad of 10. I think that this is actually a decent reason to think about 10s again, especially if you're running a war host or an aspect list where they can jump back where the single unit can jump back in the transport with a stratagem. The 10-point increase on Fire Dragons is the only point increase that is, I think, arguably defensible. They'll be at 120 now, which is 20% and 20 points higher than where they started. I think that based on objectively, the objective performance of Fire Dragons in a vacuum, I think this is appropriate. The only reason I don't think we needed it is because non-Ynnari Aeldari are already struggling so much. I would have been fine with the 10-point increase on Fire Dragons to really bring them in line with where they should be if a whole bunch of other elf stuff that's struggling had gotten some sort of boost to bring it up a bit, because Fire Dragons are currently carrying non-Ynnari elves a bit. The 4-elf Warlock Conclave, that is the larger conclave, went up 20 points, which is a lot. Those 4-elf conclaves, it's not like we've been seeing a ton of them. There were a few pretty good players who had figured out how to make them really good. And I'm especially annoyed by this one because I had just, like 6 weeks ago or so, 6 or 7 weeks ago, I had just figured out in my Seer Council lists that the 4-elf conclave is what I wanted running with Eldred, and I was very seriously considering adding a second one, and this just really hardcore shuts that down. And they were not out of control. I guess they were good in Ynnari, I hear, but like, oh my goodness, this is wild. Plus 20 points. The Incarn is up 10 points because it's a Ynnari monster. It wasn't even Empyrean in like all of the Ynnari lists. We just have to make extra sure that those Death Elves are not out of control. And then there's some Ynnari increases. The Ynnari Archon is up 10 points, I guess, in line with the increase on the Foot Autarch. And Ynnari Incubi are up 10 points for 5 and 20 points for 10. Ynnari Incubi are very good, but I think that putting Ynnari in handcuffs and throwing them down concrete stairs like 3 times, like a corrupt Boston cop roughing up a gangster in a movie from the 90s, probably was sufficient. This just feels like overkill. There are some points decreases, all of which are on units that definitely needed points decreases. And these are good. Fire Prisms are down 10 points from 160 to 150. This does not make Fire Prisms super desirable. They're still very expensive. And the biggest issue that Fire Prisms face is that on a terrain-dense table, their biggest advantage, which is extreme long range against hard targets, is more difficult to leverage. I will say that the decrease on Fire Prisms in any list is actually minus 20 points because you're always going to have 2, right? So it's now a cool 300 points for a pair of Fire Prisms. And depending on the meta, some people may actually have some luck with this. Fire Prisms are good. Those rerolls are good. But again, the terrain-dense table makes it difficult to really leverage them. Shining Spears are down 10 points for 3 and 20 points for 6. I still think you only want to run them in 3s. This is an interesting change. It's good. They needed this. I think they could have come down 15 points for 3, but they'll now be 110 to Fire Dragons 120. And I talked about recently in my video about Shining Spears how they compete a bit with Fire Dragons for hard target elimination, and Fire Dragons are just better at it into vehicles and monsters, at least in the midfield. So to get the most out of Shining Spears, you have to rely on their mobility and play them more aggressively in your opponent's backfield and run them in other interesting tactical ways. I do think that this may mean that a 1-up Spears unit will start to make sense in competitive lists, especially because Banshees with an Autarch are up 15. So Banshees may be a 1-up include now, and maybe bring some Shining Spears in to replace your second Banshee unit with for Autarch, and the points that you gain cover losses in other places or make other kinds of list modification possible. But Spears are better. And then Warwalkers are down 10 points for 1 and 20 points for 2. This change I am actually really happy with. I think Warwalkers are good. I think they create a lot of good synergies because not only do they give you 2 heavy weapons on a unit that can either start in reserve or scout, so not take up line of sight blocking terrain in your backfield, but also the ability to give everything else an AP bonus against a target. That's really good. And it's also a good reason to start a Warwalker in reserve. You bring it out on a board edge wherever you need it on turn 2. It shoots the thing, and then all of your combined whatever has an AP bonus into the thing, and that's good. And so, like, these changes really are not, they're not the end of the world, not by a long shot. There's still so much very competitive stuff in the codex that has remained untouched, and there's ways to play around this other stuff. I think I'm personally just taking this a bit hard because if you're a regular listener, you know how much I love Banshees, and I especially love that Banshee Autarch combination. It's just fun. It's fun to run. And I just feel annoyed because we were already playing the game on slightly harder than average difficulty, and now I feel like we're going to be playing on hard, and it's just, that's annoying. I do think that there's a solid chance that in 3 months, the next time we get a balanced data slate, they may scale some of this back. I don't think we're getting the points on the Fire Dragons back, but it would not surprise me if they rolled back some of these other changes and maybe gave us some other ones too, because I suspect that the summer data is going to make it clear that this was heavy-handed, and it will also, it's possible that for the rest of, that eventually this will be good for us in that with Ynnari no longer masking the fact that a lot of other detachments are struggling in the data, GW may take a look at Space Elves and be like, oh no, actually they maybe they need a little bit of help, right? The things that are not Ynnari. Ynnari were kind of like artificially carrying us. Not quite in the same way that if you've been playing since 8th edition, there was this flying circus build where you, like, in 8th edition, Aeldari were absolutely appallingly awful. Everybody remembers when they're overpowered and they're, like, unpleasant to play against. Nobody remembers the various times when they've been one of the worst factions in the game. And in late 8th edition and early 9th edition, this was true. And one of the reasons that it didn't really get noticed was that there was one way to play Eldar if you put, like, 3 Drakari planes on the table and 6 Craft Worlds planes on the table, and you just flew them around the board edges. It was like the most boring way to play, but it was like this janky thing that people did in tournaments that, like, you get the idea. Without Ynnari being a flotation device for Space Elves, we may get some other positive changes down the road in however much is left of this edition. But Dark Reapers are really good. They're really good. I'm running 20 and currently in my most competitive list, 1 10 and 2 5s, and I'm never sorry for them. If you are running dragons, the change to dragons may be a reason to run 1 10 instead of 2 5s, because if you run 1 10, 1 unit of 10, that's no increase in the cost of your dragons, where the 2 5s, you're actually increasing 20 points because each of those is going up 10. 1 unit of 10 dragons with the Phoenix Lord in a Wave Serpent, if you are running War Host or Aspect Host, is great because they can jump out. The Phoenix Lord shoots one thing, the dragons shoot something else. They pop 2 hard targets, they jump through a wall back into the transport. You need other stuff in your list. To make that work, you need other stuff in your list that will challenge, block, or pop your opponent's stuff that can get around the edge of the wall to get a bead on the dragon's transport, blow it up, and kill them. And in some matchups, you still won't be able to stop that. But it is a powerful build. It's fun to play. It's good. And Fugan often gets up after he dies, which means that even if your opponent manages to pop the thing, probably you get another round of play with him. Anyway, it's still good. I do think that the decrease on Warwalkers introduces and encourages some other cool sort of like borderline Aeldari strategies that some people have been using that can work really well. Baharoth with 10 Hawks, able to reposition in places on the table, putting out like 50 shots with lethal hits, like auto-wounding things on 6s. That package threatens anything because of the lethal hits. There's very few things in 40k left that can harm any target. It's dangerous to any target. And the one mitigating factor with the lethal hit Swooping Hawks is that they don't have any AP. So in combination with a Warwalker that starts the game maybe off the board, comes in wherever you need it to come in, shoots the thing, your Hawks land, they light the thing up, and then they can reposition, and your Warwalker is pretty quick on its feet. Maybe you've got another one. They also run nicely with Shroud Runners, which can strip cover and have the mobility and the long range to get where they need to be to shoot the thing to strip the cover. And Shroud Runners are also cheap and can help with scoring. Death Star Guardian blobs are still really good, especially in Seer Council lists where you can teleport them around the board. If you want to put the 4 Warlocks in the list, that's 20 points in the unit. That's 20 points more now, which is kind of a bummer. But it might be worth it, but that's also not an easy unit to use. I'm going to take another look at the Warp Spider Phoenix Lord with 5 Warp Spiders. The rerolls, or the bonuses to criticals that Leakus provides, that's a really cool way to snowball damage. Eldred's Doom ability is super good. There's still lots of stuff in the Eldar armory that's good and tricky and competitive and effective, and in the hands of a good player will work. Wraith Lords are really solid. They're just a really solid unit. We need Psychers anyway. They provide some durability in a list. They're a melee threat. They provide some long-range heavy weapon support. There's still plenty of stuff that's good. So this is not, if you're not a Ynnari player, this is not the apocalypse. It's just annoying because it does feel like that cheese squeezing and injustice, but it's not the apocalypse. If you're a Ynnari player, I'm so sorry. Like it's terrible. It also takes away the thing that makes the Ynnari playstyle feel fundamentally different from the other detachments, which they really did before. And that's a bummer. So even if there's a way to like technically run Ynnari and have Yvrain and use a bunch of the other tools that you would use in any Aeldari list, but lean into some of the Ynnari stratagems and kind of make it work anyway-ish, at least as well as some of the other ones. I guess you still have the Incarn, which is unique, but it is a sad day for Death Elves. There's no way around that one. So that's what I've got. Very sad day for our suspiciously pale religious fanatic cousins. A frustrating ding for the rest of us. I think probably the average Aeldari list will have gone up. I'm going to guess like 40 points. I think my Seer Council one is maybe an outlier. Maybe 50 if you were running 2-up 5 Fire Dragons and 2-up Banshees with an Autarch. And that's survivable. But good news, there are lots of other tools to spread out to in the Codex. And again, I think that there's a distinct probability that without the performance of Ynnari, this is going to lead to a data sheet, or maybe data sheets that takes us in the other direction before the edition is over, which will be good news. It'll be fun to get some more stuff on the table that has been riding the bench for most of 10th, or at least most of post-Codex 10th. Last note, there was recently a Spirit Host list that did really well at a GT, like a Wraith-heavy list with like 3-up Wraith Lords and I think like 20 or 25 Wraith Infantry, and weirdly no Spirit Seers, but a bunch of Warlocks. The Warlocks in that list will have gone up, but the list also did include things like Fire. Like one of the reasons it was effective was it had a lot of non-Wraith stuff, but it went undefeated at a GT, and it teased out the reality that there are still lots of cool combos in the 10th edition Codex that are effective, and we haven't really explored yet, and that's encouraging. Okay, so that's what I've got. I'm going to go comfort my very upset Banshees and remake some lists, and I hope to be back again next week with something new. Until then, many thanks to my sponsor, my patrons, and Kegarak for helping us keep some perspective on the absurdity of existence.